That's good, I can hear myself. I'm John Pritchard, Chairman of the Ver Valley Society, and I've just got a few slides to show you, and I've concentrated on photos wherever possible of Redbourn, so you can see what we've been up to in Redbourn, and hopefully we can build on our beginnings, if you like. So if I can have the first slide. Unfortunately, there's nothing sadder than a river with no water in it. And water really is life. That picture some of you will recognise is the Flint Field Porridge Pot, as it's known locally, on the way to Redbourn Golf Club. And also the fact that there's no water, the Ver Valley Society began in 1976, which many of you will remember was a long hot summer. The River Ver dried up pretty much right along its length, and the Ver Valley Society was formed to get water back into the River Ver. And since then has been campaigning. Briefly mention, obviously much water was taken from the 1950s onwards, particularly savagely dealt blows really to the Ver in this area. Areas that were previously wet most often were dry. The Society campaigned, and a number of abstraction points, pumping stations have been closed down. Friars Wash much reduced up at junction 9 of the M1. Bow Bridge recently closed. Bow Bridge is halfway between here and St Albans. And the good news is that Affinity have in their latest plans to finally close Friars Wash permanently, close the Redbourn pumping station, which is near the Redbourn Golf Club, and reduce by 75% the take at Kensworth, which is the only other pumping station on the Ver. So we might see some good results in 10 years or so. In the meantime, the next slide is much more upbeat, and that's what a chalk stream should look like, really. The bottom, you can see the clean gravel at the bottom where much of the insect life lives. You can see the ranunculus, which is that long green weed, sort of the river buttercup, really, and that thrives where there's good oxygenated water with a decent flow. And believe it or not, that spot there is between here and Redbourn Mill. So we've got from the very good to the very bad in a very short space around Redbourn. So if we move on to the next section, the next slide, that's two, I think, isn't it? Yes. So what do we actually do? Well, work parties, we encourage our members, and we're all volunteers, to come along on our work parties. We have one every month. Richard, who's our work party organiser, our action group organiser, actually lives in Redbourn, is in the audience tonight. But the picture there of nearly 20 people at the back of the checkers in the snow shows how dedicated they are. Shortly to dive into the river and along the banks. In that sort of area, there's lots of willow and lots of other commercial crops that drop their twigs and branches into the river, and we take them out to create a much better habitat. We organise litter picks. You can see there that was Punch Bowl Lane last year. We had 20 people there, came along and picked litter on the weekend. And you can see that at the bottom there's some footballs, and there's a Steradent packet. We didn't find any false teeth, I hasten to add, in the river. That was last weekend. That was actually down in St Albans. And we've got pool bending over there in just at the bottom of the high street in the River Red. That was last Christmas. And there's a team at Redbourn Mill repairing the willow spining, which stops the silt and sediment getting into the river. So there's sort of some of the things that we do at our work parties locally, all water and river connected. The next slide, please. Back at the beginnings of the society carved the river into 12 beats, and there was a bailiff on every beat, and once a month those bailiffs go out. There's Peter up there in the top right, he's in the audience tonight. But once a month they go out along the river, measure the flow, measure the depth, often there's no flow, whatever, and give us a report on the wildlife that they spot on their monthly walk. There's Bob, he's at the back of the checkers, measuring the depth of the river, or about to. And we report things like fly tipping on Hog End Lane. One of the members, obviously one of the bailiffs there, had 5 bottles of vodka on one of the Valley Society benches. So wherever possible, we'll pick those up and recycle. So that's what the river bailiffs do. You can see there the River Red has turned yellow. I actually look after some of the red and visit it once a month on an official basis, if you like. And it's surprising how often there's an incident on the River Red. It's the Ver's only significant tributary, but unfortunately it's connected to the Spencer Park housing estate, to the back of Hemel Hempstead, and also to some of the filtration ponds on the M1. So some nasties come into the River Red, and then it go on down into the Ver. And we're working hard to try and stop that happening, or at least to minimise the consequences. Next one, please. Citizen science, again, this is on the Red as it happens, but we've got 10 spots that we monitor on the Red and the Ver. We do nitrate and phosphate testing there. You can see the nitrate level pretty near the top, which is pretty horrible. And we also do a turbidity test, so you fill up a tube with river water and you look down it and you measure how far you can fill it up before the bottom disappears. And you can see that was a recent visit to the River Red. There's an oily substance in the tube. It's pretty horrible and it's rather cloudy. So that's another pollution incident, and if significant, we'll ring it into the Environment Agency and try and get them to come out and have a look. So we're always looking for volunteers to help us with our citizen science. That's all recorded on a national database, so we can see how the Ver and the Red are doing relative to their fellow chalk streams, if you like. We also conduct river fly sampling, and there are several reasons for that. Again, it's a national programme. It began when anglers realised that the creatures that live in the river were declining. And they weren't quite sure why, and they wanted some statistics to prove that what they thought was happening was indeed happening. So again, we've got nearly 20 places on the Ver and the Red where we take samples every month. You basically put your welly boots on or your waders, kick the bottom, and the flow of the river takes the little insects into the net. And you then put the little insects in a tray, try and identify them, count how many they are, which can be quite fun. And record it on a monthly basis. So, to emphasise the point, rivers need water, and good clean water in them, for 12 months of the year. These insects, their whole life cycle takes 12 months. And most of it, there's some cased caddis at the top there. The big one is about 2 centimetres long. The small one's about 2 millimetres long. They're quite hard to see. And they build their homes from vegetation or from stones on the bottom, depending on the species. They live in the river and they hatch out, and most people don't know what a caddisfly looks like. Well, there's an adult at the bottom. It looks a bit like a moth right there in the bottom right-hand corner. It lives like that for maybe 2 weeks. Lays its eggs on the water or on the stems of the plants that come out of the water, and the cycle goes round again until next year. So they need water for the whole 12 months. On this side, this is what's called an olive. Again, that lives under the water. This particular one lives under the stones, in the gravel, sometimes in the weed. And that hatches out and lives for, well, the big mayfly live famously for 1 day, maybe 2. These ones live for about a fortnight. And that's the adult there on the underside of some goosegrass. So not very big at all, a centimetre, maybe a little bit longer. And they all depend on good, clean chalk water for their very existence. The Red gets some of these, but there are also lots of leeches and pond snails and other not really chalk stream species, because it's got low oxygen content. And these particular creatures were picked because they're very sensitive to pollution. So if their numbers drop, then again we'll contact the Environment Agency to come out and have a look if they can tell us why we've suddenly lost all our insects. Okay, the next slide, please. And the good news is, if you've got insects, then you've got kingfishers, you've got little fish, minnows, you've got brown trout. Now, these photos are all taken within a mile or so of this room. So, that particular kingfisher is sitting in Verulamium Park, but I personally saw one sitting in the industrial estate when the water was back there last winter. We've got a stickleback there in male in its breeding colours, which came out of a riverfly sample. Brown trout at Redbourn Bury, wild brown trout, and they've been breeding, laying their eggs just before Christmas in the gravel, in the clean gravel bottom. And again, they need clean gravel, no silt,
oxygenated water to breathe successfully. Little minnow at the top, which the kingfisher's got its eye on. Barn owl, now again, that benefits from the margins of the river being left. If you've got wild grasses and a good buffer zone, then that means that there'll be lots of voles for it to feed on, particularly. The Ver Valley Society, I know John Fisher's in the audience tonight, he personally has been responsible for putting up many barn owl boxes along the Ver, and I think our programmes they've successfully reared over 100 chicks in the last 15 or 20 years, so which is a big success for us. But we also put up boxes for smaller species that again rely on the insects along the River Ver. So that's just a snapshot of what will come back. If the water comes back, the insects come back, or if we do our bit to keep it as clean as possible. And then water voles. Most of you will know that there was a reintroduction programme. It was a great collaboration between Herts and Middlesex Wildlife Trust to organise the voles, the funding of the voles, the project officer, to introduce them on the stretch between Gorhambury and the Veolia works on the Redbourn Road. I think smart money is on them being probably north of Redbourn,